So you will want to pull down any branch on the GitHub repo that is not labeled PNW PHP 2017 or PNW 2017. There are like 4 or 5 other branches. I will, in these slides, reference which branch you should be looking at. If you want to look at the finished, so first pull master, composer install, and then at that point you'll have your dependencies. And at that point, if you switch branches, those dependencies will stick around. We will be using the same version of the dependencies all the way through, so that's that. We will be starting on the initial setup branch, which doesn't include much of anything, and then kind of going from there. My expectation is that y'all will get at least partway through, or maybe all the way through, some of the earlier kind of tasks that we're going to do to build this effectively our own version of Google Assistant with very limited vocabulary of stuff to do. But as we get later on to the presentation, what you'll likely need to do is pull the latest branch or pull the latest commits or cherry pick the latest commits in order to catch up. And that's fine. At the end of this presentation, by hook or by crook, y'all will have an assistant that has, well, I'll just show the slide for what all the assistant's going to do in just a second, since we are now at time, and I guess we'll get started. So, my name is Ian Littman. You are in the Build-A-Bot workshop. If you do not want to be building the equivalent of a little Google Assistant that you can load up in a browser and talk to and get voice responses back and process natural language and answer questions by bouncing off of an HTTP API, you might be in the wrong room. If you want to do all those things, you're probably in the right room. Again, this is not an Alexa skills talk. There are a lot of good resources for sitting down and going from 0 to, okay, get your Lambda function set up, get your natural language processing stuff keyed into Alexa. Fortunately, you don't actually have to muck around with JSON anymore. They have a little skills builder that you can use. That is not the subject of this talk. That, because it's AWS APIs, they're a little harder to mess with, so that ends up being a couple of day tutorial, and we have 2.5 hours. Also, if you are looking to integrate bots into Slack or Facebook Messenger, spoiler alert, they are both HTTP webhook based. They're not too big of a deal to integrate with. Slack has some WebSocket integrations as well. We will not be talking about that either. There is a, I believe, Laravel-based framework called Botman that will allow you to do those integrations. But we're going to be a little bit more focused than that. So what we will be doing is building a UI in a web browser that first we're going to take text input, then we're going to layer in voice output using speech synthesis, which is built into most web browsers now. On top of that, we will layer in voice input and speech recognition, that fun stuff that we actually don't have to do a whole lot of twiddling for. On top of that, we will be layering in natural language processing or natural language understanding to turn a spoken or written sentence into parse parameters that we can then feed into a webhook that we will be implementing, which in this particular case, we will be pulling down from the joined-in API to get the PHP world schedule and reading events off of that. Finally, we will, time permitting, play around with setting this entire thing up as a Google Assistant action. Alexa calls them skills. Google calls them actions, where you can hook your app into Google Assistant. So it'll show up on here or on there. Oh, and we will have the ability to remember where you left off in a conversation and provide additional information via what the NLU package calls context. So you can say, okay, tell me the next thing, tell me the next thing, tell me the next thing, keep iterating through all of that without actually having to have a database locally on the webhook side. So, for those of y'all who have not done so yet, here's the list of requirements again. You can either use the Docker file and then do a volume mount to make sure that your code matches up with whatever you're editing at the time. Or if you have PHP 7.1 installed locally, which, get it, it's almost out of date. 7.2 is coming up in a few weeks. Yeah, download and install that locally. And unless you're running a really, really minimal build of 7.1, you'll have everything you need. You can pull down the repo and just run it locally. I'll actually be using the local version this time rather than the Docker version because I haven't yet figured out how to get Chrome OS to work with Docker. So again, if you haven't already, pull down the requirements document, get those dependencies installed, and then we will be off to the races. While you're doing that, as best as I can understand it, there are three pieces of something like Google Assistant or something like a smart device that is sitting there slurping up information and then maybe giving you some useful info back. You have your front end, which is responsible for your maybe speech to text, maybe you have text input to start with, and that front end is also responsible for outputting either just voice if you're talking about a device like an Echo or a Google Home, or whatever Harman Kardon speaker that has Cortana now, or the HomePod or whatever. Or you might have a device that has a screen, Echo Show or your phone, or maybe even your computer if you use either a web or mobile app that supports some of these SDKs. And in those cases, you'll have maybe text input, maybe voice input, maybe text output, maybe rich output, such as usually these platforms will have what they call cards to have heading, subheading, kind of structured information. Maybe just plain old text output. Either way, the front end is responsible for taking the input and actually getting it into a text format to hand off, and then get the output and present it prettily. Then you have this middle section, the Natural Language Understanding section, or NLU. That section is responsible for taking the text sentence and parsing it out into, okay, what action am I trying to perform? What information am I trying to collect? And what parameters are in that information request? Or what parameters do I need to ask for to have enough information to know what this person is asking? So fortunately, we don't have to build that on our own. There are a few different products that various companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, offer that we can integrate into, so we don't have to do all of the machine learning or, if you're trying to raise funding, AI stuff on our own. Finally, if the NLU system can't just give you a static result or maybe throw in some templated variables in the response, you have to go back to a webhook to take those parse parameters, maybe take some context information as well, and maybe call some external API and get your results back. So we have three components to this bot, for lack of a better term. We'll start with the middle one, the natural language understanding side of things. This one we will be not doing really any coding to start with. We'll just be interacting with a web UI, which is fine. You can the web UI is actually nice and friendly to use and is a really solid way to interact with it. It exports JSON, which you can then play around with manually. You can import JSON into it if you want to use another tool to programmatically build these decision trees. Which actually, if you build your natural language understanding system like a phone tree, you're doing it wrong. You want to be able to collect as much information about what a user says to start with, rather than going through and asking them one question at a time. It's a better user experience to say, to parse correctly, I want to book a flight on either Southwest or Delta tomorrow afternoon between Washington, D.C. and Austin. That would theoretically be enough information to provide flight results. What you don't want your application to do is then ask, so where do you want to go? I just told you. So the system that we're going to use for natural language understanding is Dialogflow. You'll see one or two references to API.ai or API_AI if I'm dealing with an environment variable in the application code that we'll be looking at, because this product used to be called API.ai. Between the time that I did this presentation last in Seattle and now, Google changed the name on it because, well, TensorFlow for machine learning, Dialogflow for natural language understanding, I guess that was their rationale. So if you see documentation referencing API.ai, it's probably still current, but Google has renamed everything to Dialogflow, and they've done a good job of revising that naming in their documentation, because I think they renamed it about a month ago. At any rate, there are a few key terms in natural language understanding that you're going to need to understand to take advantage of it. First off, we have intents. An intent could be something as simple as, get me the schedule for PHP World. Or it could be something even simpler of, hello, insert name of app here, in which case that intent just represents a set of functionality, a kind of directed decision tree that, given an initial set of inputs, an initial sentence or something close to that, we can figure out what, generally speaking, the user is trying to do. At that point, each intent has utterances. An utterance is a particular phrasing of the question that we're trying to answer. For example, okay, a PHP World schedule, tell me what's next. Or, what's the next event? Or, what is the next event on Thursday? Any of those phrasings are each an individual utterance, and they'll have either parameters in certain places, or they may not have the presence of a parameter at all. Those parameters may map, or do map, to what NLU systems call entities. For example, if you're asking about nearby restaurants, then you're probably going to specify what restaurant type. And an entity can expand and say, okay, well, this is a restaurant type of burgers, and then you have synonyms for that, or restaurant type of Italian, or what have you. So once you have your entities, which generally an NLU system will have built-in ones for dates, times, places. Addresses get a little wonky because the search space for what constitutes a valid address, particularly when you're dealing with voice input, is hit or miss. But they have address input, colors, etc. that are built in. In the case of Dialogflow, those entities are you're looking for @sys dot various parameter types. Once you have your entities, those entities get slotted into slots and parameters. You can have an entity that actually doesn't go anywhere, that you don't need, that you're just selecting so that you'll capture somebody's request. Or you can capture the value of that entity and say, okay, somebody asked for a burger restaurant. I need to pass that burger restaurant request back to whatever webhook that I'm serving, or maybe parse it out locally, maybe return it back to the user. So slots are a way to capture the parameter information from those entities. There's a process if the user does not provide enough information to start with for the request, like, oh, hey, I want to look at restaurants. Well, maybe our API isn't set up to handle a request that generally. Through a process called slot filling, we can say, okay, hey, this is a required parameter. We always want to know restaurant type. Please prompt the user without calling our webhook, without doing anything like that, just within the NLU system, just go back and forth until we have all the information that we need to process this request. On top of that, you can have non-required parameters where you aren't necessarily requiring that I have the full postal address of somewhere where I want to send a postcard in order to figure out what the price is. But maybe it's nice to have, and maybe it saves us some effort down the road of having to prompt for that. This is all happening at the NLU level. You're not having to write any API code yet. It'll go back and forth and ask for the information that you need before shuttling off to your API to say, all right, what do I do next? So that what do I do next is an action. You can map multiple intents to the same action. You can't go in the opposite direction. Any intent is going to map to a single action. That action, again, specifies which, what the pattern of, okay, here's our slots, here are our parameters, here are our entities that a whole bunch of utterances map to. And then that, in turn, leads to fulfillment, where we are now requesting some sort of backing API, or maybe we're returning the answer directly, hard-coded, either with maybe parameter replacement, or maybe one of a few different potential answers. Finally, even though it's the second to last thing on the list, there's the concept of context, where a given back and forth of an utterance followed by an action can return back, hey, set this bit of context, set this bit of information on the response so that the user doesn't have to repeat themselves, or they can pick up where they left off. And that context is basically an array of, okay, here's our key, and maybe here are our values within that key. One thing about context is contexts have a lifetime of X number of requests, and then I believe they time out after a few minutes as well, so that you don't have a case of picking up where you left off when you really didn't want to pick it back up there. So you have a bit of fine-grained control over here. So at this point, I'll stop talking with just a slide up and jump into the Dialogflow console. So if you have not already, you'll want to create a Dialogflow account, which will require creating a Google account if you don't have one of those already. Log in and create a new agent. An agent, which is identified with an API key on Dialogflow's side, is the overarching place that you'll be interacting with for your bot. It has all of your intents, it has all of your entities, it has one webhook that you call out to, specifies all your actions, and all of that can be downloaded as a single JSON archive, and then you can restore it back or import it. So let's call this, okay, authorize. Okay. And we'll start out with a completely blank project. We'll start it with a new Google project here. Because as time has gone on, Dialogflow has gotten a lot more integrated with Google on how they interact. Let's create that. And this will take a few seconds because they're handling a fair amount of stuff behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I'm going to check Slack and see if there are any questions. There are not. Again, if you are not already in that Slack channel, you want to jump in there. Okay, so that created our agent. Yeah, okay, fine. Right, we're going to move over to here because their API aired out. All right, so to start with, we have a default fallback intent, which is what the API will return when it sees something that does not match a standard intent. You also have a default welcome intent, where you can specify, hey, I want to, when you start interacting with this system, and don't provide an intent, but saying, hey, I'm starting to interact with the system, hello, this is the intent that gets called, and we can go in there and say, okay, we have default welcome intent, so it will handle deciding what utterances to handle there, or you can specify a specific event. In this case, it's the welcome event, and then it skips the natural language processing part. So we'll say, okay, remove these text responses in the fulfillment side. And you know what? Let's add that as a potential utterance because yeah, nothing special. And we can have multiple of these. And you know what? We'll go ahead and do input. Okay, that action name is already set. Yep. On the utterances, it is not case sensitive. Yeah. The responses will be handed back in whatever case that you provide them. The responses are probably the least magical part of the NLU system. So let's see here first. So one thing you can do here is set placeholders and say, okay, I want this placeholder, I want this entity to be required. So what I did is I double-clicked on, hi, I'm Ian. Okay, double-click on Ian in there. It'll pop up the menu to say, okay, you want to assign an entity to this. What entity do you want to assign? And then you can pick from the existing entities. If you go over into the entity tool over on the left-hand side, then you can create your own custom entities, either by aggregating existing entities, which is beyond the scope of this discussion, but you can do that. Or you can have a whole bunch of hard-coded values that saying, okay, I'm going to create a new entity of restaurant type. It can be burgers, Italian, Persian, etc. In this case, we can use the pre-generated system entity of given name. Once you select an entity, once you add that into your utterance, it'll show up down here. And you can change the name of the parameter. You can change the type of the parameter. You can set a value here. Let's see here. We got slots. So this is still on the intent side of things.
So once I add that up above, I select that this name should be referred to as a given name instead of finding the variable name there.
Yes. Yep.
So I need to define, it won't automatically define the parameter. I'm defining that whatever I got as a given name inside the variable.
So let me back up and remove this to show which things I did and which things it automatically did for me. So if I double click here, then it shows me the list of entities that I can potentially assign to it. And in certain cases, it will pick up on potential entities and try and fill them out for you, or recommend entities, put them near the top of the list. In this case, we'll just find as you type there, click on given name. And then it will show for each utterance, okay, here are the entities. You can figure out what slot they're being assigned to, which parameter they're being assigned to. Then down below here, note that this is without any configuration whatsoever. Here are the defaults. Parameter name is given name. Value is exactly what the parameter was. I'll go ahead and rename this to name. Value changes. We can tell it to require it, at which point it says, okay, how do you want me to prompt if the user did not provide an utterance that includes that name parameter? In this user says piece right here, Yep. You click the required checkbox over on the left. Yep. Yeah, it does. Your other left? And you can also specify that a parameter is a list, in which case, if you're, say, building a shopping list of, or a toppings on a hamburger of I want lettuce, tomato, pickles, onions, and then it will pass you that parameter as an array. So at this point, let's see here. So text response, we can provide one of multiple responses. We can also use the exact placeholders that we set earlier to do a text response without round tripping back to our backing web service. Yes.
So with that variable that you're adding that response, say it's going to be required, only use that response, use that variable.
I'm not sure about that because most of the time, if there is a response that includes some permutation of the input, then I'm having to round trip to the back end to do something useful with it anyway. That's a good question. That's something that should be pretty quick to figure out. So we'll go ahead and save this, and it will tell me. Okay, so it says agent training started. There's a little bit of machine learning that goes on in the background when you save an intent to get the big old if-else tree known as a TensorFlow model or whatever they're using on the back end. I'm sure it's TensorFlow or some custom googly thing to decide, given a string that contains your input, what to map it to. Over on the right here, you have a UI to interact with your agent directly, rather than having to build your own API client. It does support voice input. We're not going to use that at the moment, though. We're going to say greetings. It's going to return back, okay, it's asking me what's your name, because I set that as a required parameter. And there we go. So at this point, we have entities, we have various responses here. So we'll go one step further here. I said we would be using context for this. So what I can do here is let's set tell it, okay, we have a name context, and that's valid for the next 5 responses. So we pop open this name context here. Let's go show JSON. Let me. Okay, so now that we told it, hey, set a context when you're done processing this request, it set a context with the parameters that we passed in on the initial request of name, and then name original is the exact text value of the name. Name otherwise is, they'll do some mapping and matching to clean up the input. So now that we have that, we can... did you save your intent to start with? So what utterances do you have available? So at the top here, you have this user says. That's an utterance. Okay. So if you have, and you have an action, you have a text response configured toward the bottom. Okay. So if all that's saved out, you should be able to copy paste from one of your utterances and then make the request, and it should give you back. Well, if you say greetings, it should prompt you for the name if you told it to require the name. I have greetings specifically. If you want the system to understand what a given phrase, you have to specify the phrase. Yep. So no, the context is optional. The context is useful for the next step that I'm going to show. Yes. So right now, you see the highlight there? That variable is now an entity. So if I say, yeah, there are certain things that it will pick up on, saying, okay, well, this is the closest thing to a given utterance that we already know of. So obviously they meant to say this, and it'll map things out. But that is not a guarantee. If you go into kind of the training section of the UI, that is training the model, that is not training you, it'll show what things have been said to the agent, how they were mapped, what parameters were parsed, etc. And you can get an idea of, okay, somebody is interacting with my agent in a way that I hadn't thought of. Let's go ahead and have that exact interaction pattern copy paste. There you go. You can have that exact set of parameters thrown in as another utterance for your intent. So you can make sure to catch that, and then the machine learning will catch something close to it, rather than falling back to your fallback intent. So you have this value of $name here, and then you just use $name down there, and once you put in the $, it should autocomplete with, or show you an autocompletion set of options. Yes. Yeah, I'm going to try to use the technical lingo terms of this just so that you get used to it. Stop me if I need to mention the definition again.
So where I was saying you could enter your name into the item, put that as a variable name?
So you would do, there are a couple ways of handling it. You can switch over to specifying, hey, I want this entity name of given name, etc. But the way I've typically interacted with this is you give a sentence with a value for the placeholder already in there, and then tell the system, hey, this is a placeholder, this is an entity, and then it'll, on the back end, say, okay, well, for values of this entity, and make sure that this particular placeholder maps to the correct entity. So if I do that, and it shows right there at the top as, okay, you probably are looking to assign this to a given name. And in certain cases, if you have enough of these utterances, and you have enough entities, and the entities are specific enough, then merely adding a sentence, merely adding an utterance, the system will automatically catch, oh, here's an entity, here's an entity, here's an entity, assign here, assign here, assign here. At which point, you'll still want to double check it, but it does a lot of the work for you automatically. But at that point, you're looking at already having assigned probably a dozen or so utterances. Maybe it'll pick it up before then, but I have certain intents on another project that I did for a client that has, in some cases, 3 little pages of utterances for a single intent, and then probably 6 pages of intents. So it's a pretty interesting project. And you have the parameter set to given name. And you saved your intent since you told it to parameterize it?
Yeah, try a couple different ways. Exactly.
Right. So the one key thing here is these entities, they are not generic placeholders. Yeah, it's the specificity of these entities is a feature, it's not a bug, because you don't want hi %s because it's going to capture absolutely everything. What you want is a specific set of, okay, here is valid input. It does your input validation for you because it's not going to match otherwise. So we'll go ahead and throw a context in here. Let's save that. Name context. We can add a follow-up intent, or we can say, okay, oh, I can actually drop out this context here and tell it, and this is just a shortcut for adding a context on both requiring a context on the input and providing a context on the output. We can click on add follow-up intent, do custom. At which point it populates an input context here. It populated an output context with a lifetime of 3 on, I think it's 3, it may be just 1, on the intent that we were just working on. Okay, so what I've done here is I've set up a context such that the only time that I can say open the pod bay doors is if I have already stated my name and gone through the welcome intent. Now, on the welcome intent, it's not strictly necessary to add context because it's kind of just a welcome intent unless you want to collect additional information about the user. It may be useful if you are looking at a more tree-like structure or iterating through a list of realizing where you left off, and we'll actually see that later on in the presentation. But there, okay. And then now that I have the context set on it, I can say, all right, so in contrast, if I clear out my contexts and tell it, okay, open the pod doors, it's not going to recognize it because that particular intent is hidden behind a context saying you have to have this context in order, and you have to have that context active, so mentioned within the last few, or added within the last few requests in order to get to this particular intent. Realistically, you're going to, if you want to be sure that something is going to match, you need to specify it as an utterance. It will do some fuzzy matching, but if you know ahead of time what your potential inputs are going to be, you want to specify those inputs to make sure that they're mapped to the correct thing. This becomes particularly important when you have a bunch of intents with relatively similar utterances, where you don't necessarily, where you want a given utterance to go to a specific intent. So you can lean on the machine learning to make sense of, okay, it was about 95% close to this phrasing for this intent, to pick it up that way. But don't expect a whole bunch of magic to understand what you were thinking if you didn't provide it explicitly. It's a powerful tool. It is not 110% magic. So at that point, what I'm usually doing with context is I'm usually passing that back to an API, at which point I'm reading the context back, and then using those context values in that case. The obvious ways of providing a text response from a previous context value, I just tried them, and you're right, they don't work. You have to actually do some backend code for that. There's probably a way to refer to previous context values, and I'm just getting the incantation wrong, which is where reading proper documentation on this comes in handy. But at a certain point, you're going to get out of this UI and start writing your own webhook code to handle these permutations, because realistically, the contexts and these kind of patterned responses in general have limited value relative to actually returning real information from your API. So we're going to put, unless anybody has additional questions here, right now we have kind of the middle piece in the sandwich of, okay, this is Dialogflow. We're doing our natural language understanding. We're mapping our intents. We're potentially creating entities, etc. But number one, we're not going to have our users log in to Dialogflow and run their flows from here. We want them to log in or view this from a browser, and eventually we want to hook up our own custom webhook functionality to this. So the next step is to jump into the web UI side of things. So again, if you have not already, please clone down the repo. We are going to need it from here on out. We're going to be doing front-end work for a little while here. Do not be dismayed. My elite JavaScript skills are worse than yours, probably. But yeah, pull the repo down, composer install, and then switch branches to initial setup. The master branch has the completed version of the project, which is great if you need a morale boost or want to see how I hacked this stuff together. But we want to get from the initial point to that later piece. And again, you probably want to fork the repo. I'll leave that up to you. And yes, I decided to use as little and as low-level JavaScript as possible here. I don't even think I included jQuery for this. Because, well, realistically, jQuery is not going to provide you any nicer wrapper. Okay. It's not going to provide you a nicer wrapper around your voice input and output functionality, which is a lot of the main stuff that we're going to be doing with this JS side of things, as well as integrating with the Dialogflow API. So the little bit of element munging, I guess there was some reason that I needed to pull in jQuery, maybe some Bootstrap stuff, but it's not used that much. So at this point, I already included the Dialogflow client. I'm calling it the API.ai client, and I did not want to trash my entire Git version history again to rename it to Dialogflow, but it redirects to the same place. The library still works, probably will for a while. So there's a JavaScript client that sets up your session and you can use to make calls over the Dialogflow API and get back a promise that resolves, and you end up with your response text, which interestingly enough may be different from the voice side of the response that we'll integrate later. But go ahead. You want to use the client key. In this particular implementation, and actually in all of the implementations that I've dealt with, because I've been interacting with building the intents, etc., via the UI, I have not needed to use the developer key at all for Dialogflow. If you are programmatically adding intents, entities, etc., that's what you'll use the developer key for. But the client-side key is all you need for integrations like this, where you're just querying against the existing intents. So right now, so you don't actually have to pull down anything on the Dialogflow side. You're just hitting their API. And I think I just made a call out to Rawgit or something like that, but the library for the Dialogflow API is already included, the script for that on the JS side. It's just called API AI. I believe it's called API AI JavaScript client. If you look around for that in the code, you'll see it. And this is in the template file. Let's see if I can find it here. Yep, it's in Bond. Let me okay, get branch. Are you talking about the key? So if you go over to your gear icon for your settings, it's right there. You want the client. And I did some nasty non-twig, non-anything template magic in there so that you can provide the API key via an environment variable, and the README for the Build About workshop includes, other than having to change the whole bunch of X's to your actual own API key, you can copy and paste that PHP-S, etc., and get your local PHP web server running with this code. And it's also got a Docker version of that command as well. No. No, you can, so it's not actually Twig. It is a string replace. So I just catted out my little script so I wouldn't typo this, but the line that I have highlighted on screen here, you're setting your environment variable at your command line and then immediately telling, hey, PHP, serve this. Yep, just using the PHP built-in web server that's been there since 5.4. You're talking Apache? There's a way to set environment variables. I think it's set env on Apache. Unfortunately, I have not. The sites for which I'm using Apache are not using environment variables with setenv, so I do not know off the top of my head. Worst case, you can, at the top of your index file, you can define $_env bracket API AI key, and just do it that way. The disadvantage of working with Nginx on basically any project where I'm doing the web server stuff is I've gotten rusty on how to do things in Apache, because the configuration file format is completely different. So at this point, if I did things right, so note here that you will need to write the API.ai code or the code to interact with the Dialogflow API library. Or, if you'd rather, each of the slides that involve writing code has a here's what I did link. That link will take you to the commit where I actually did the work to bring us up to finishing this particular step. In this particular case, we also have the implement text requests branch that is the exact same repo except with the commit applied, so that you have the library already wired up, at which point you can go back and see what I changed to get that JS client to work. So I figure give you all a few minutes to play around with this or just switch branches. What you should be able to do once you're done here is, I'll show this. Okay, it's calling the API. Question is, oh, I know what the issue is. So I have the wrong client access token. Okay, so once you have your once you have this process done, you should be able to go in, refresh your localhost port 8080 or 9000/bot page, and then have the same set of interactions on this little page as you did within the Dialogflow console test side of things. Which, spoiler alert, we will be going back to a little bit later, because instead of doing just a plain old greeting, what we really want to do is do something useful, which is ask what's next on the PHP world schedule. I'll throw these hints back up here for the moment. And I'll give you all another couple minutes. Yep. Sure.
Find kind of a subset that don't really care what that so basically, like, if I were to ask, like, what's the next class, where's the next class, what time is it? I mean, I guess some of those you might want to respond, but like, I was just wondering where the next class is. I set that almost as a, I don't care what passed in, I just want to know the next class.
Yeah, in that case, what you would do is you would set, you would have the utterance have no variables in it, and you would make sure that the date or time parameter is optional. And
so I guess the question is, will it look, in terms of experience, will it look for, if I set utterance as a short string, if it gets a longer string that contains that, will it match it with that utterance?
in some cases, it will. When we're dealing with a low number of intents like this, chances are, yeah, it will. It's just a matter of when you have a whole bunch of intents with a whole bunch of utterances that may be similar, then you don't necessarily want to rely on that. But the nice thing on this is testing whether a string contains thing like that will work the feedback loop is nice and short. You don't have to modify any of your code. You throw the utterance in there, and then you go over the console and test it. And if you do a project like this at any sort of scale, you're going to be spending a lot of time bouncing between throwing in user inputs and then going to the console and testing to make sure they do what you expect them to. I need to make sure that I don't have any. People aren't using the Slack. Yeah, that's fine. What now? Yeah, /bot. You go to /bot. Yeah. So if you look in routes.php, I have that mapped. I have not tested this in Apache. It honestly is going to be easier to use the PHP built-in web server, because I tested with the web server and I tested with the Docker setup, which uses Nginx and FPM. /bot. If you get a whatever port you told php-s to use. So if you look back at the php-s command here, yep. So it'd be localhost 9000 /bot. Are you getting a slim page not found error? If you're getting this, okay. And your address bar looks like this? /index shouldn't, so, okay. Yeah, I don't have an htaccess file in here. So rewriting back to the htaccess file, if you go to that's the set of rewrites that you would want to throw into an htaccess file in order to get this to work with Apache. It's just using Slim3. So fortunately, Slim3 is, well, there's not much to document, and it's pretty well documented, the stuff that is there. Yeah, clearing, etc. You are in JS land, so normal rules apply there. I believe if you find the element and then set dot value to entry string, yeah. So at this point, I will move on to the next step here. And again, if you, provided that you can get the site to load to that page, you can jump to where I am in the presentation by applying the commits or checking out the branch, which each slide at the end of it, there's going to be a branch for that. So here's some of the fun stuff. Okay, right now we're just talking about an API integration with text in, text out. That's kind of boring. Next piece is speaking the response. So there's this Windows speech synthesis property. Documentation is linked there to the lovely MDN page, which probably means that since Chris Hartjes works at Mozilla, that I owe him money for mentioning him. Whoops. And you have the ability to pick a voice, pick pitch, pick speed, etc., and then hand it a bunch of text and tell it, all right, I'll put this to the PC speaker. And you don't have to deal with trying to convert the audio manually or doing something crazy in JavaScript land, because this API is actually pretty well supported across browser. And you can look here to see what I did to add this in, and I just added a checkbox of, hey, I want to speak the response, in which case we go in and call the Windows Speech Synthesis API to speak the response. Alternately, you can just check out the Add Speech Synthesis branch, and that'll give you the additional functionality. So what that looks like is, there you go. So did you, are you setting a context on your initial request? And so there should be a context out on the initial request, and then a context in on the follow-up. No, that's fine. So, and what we'll do here, I'll go ahead and start creating this. Mm-hmm. So if you can think of a phrase, make sure it's an utterance. You should not rely on the fuzzy matching. That is an added bonus. That is a, hey, this works and I didn't specifically type it in. Not a, I'm going to rely on fuzzy matching for everything. Treat this as if it is strictly matched with the entity's variable substituted in, and you'll be pleasantly surprised at the stuff that it picks up, but do not rely on it to pick up things that you have not specified. Also, as a side note, I would stay away from setting an entity to a Boolean value. The better way to handle yes, no, etc., is to create a follow-up intent with the yes and synonyms values or no and synonyms values. It may evaluate to the same thing on the machine learning side of things, but if you can also use an entity for specifically yes or an entity for specifically no if you want a way to say, oh, well, I have 10 of these intents. All of them require yes or no answers. I don't want to miss some synonym for yes on the follow-up for one of them when I had the other 9 correctly. At that point, you can use an entity for yes. But if you actually have branching logic flow rather than picking from a set, you don't. You want to represent that as another intent. You don't want to have to push that branching logic all the way to your backend and do parameter parsing there. Set schedule there. Set action schedule here. I am not sure whether you can get a previous context value within the context of. Thank you for looking that up. But yeah, in this case, you would set, for example, on the schedule side of things, you would set a context of schedule, and then now it's, you would set on, you create another intent. And tell it, okay, context up here, and we need schedule. And then go from there. And fill that out with, okay, now that I have a schedule, now that I have these values for the context, then I can echo out the rest. So at this point, I'll give you all a few more minutes to get up to the speech synthesis side, which when we're complete on that, if I start my web server up again. We end up with
PHP World.
Okay. Simple enough stuff on the UI side, but if you look at the branch that I'm now on of add speech synthesis, you can see that last commit has the code needed to tell the window, hey, go ahead and speak this out. One thing to note here is Dialogflow internally, and you can actually do this as well on your own side of things via API responses. You can specify a different voice response than a text response to deal with either pronunciation issues, or there are just certain cases where text and voice, you should have definitely different responses for them. There are, trying to recall whether you can do that in the web UI. I know there's there are tags XML-ish tags that you can use to specify phonetics and such. I do not know off the top of my head, because usually by spelling things out a little bit differently, I've been able to get around pronunciation issues, because again, you can display something different than what you've seen on the voice side, or what you output on the voice side. I know that, for example, on Amazon Polly, which is the speech synthesis, if you're having to do speech synthesis server side or API side in general, then Amazon Polly is a good way to do that, and they allow you to specify, hey, I want this speech to be said in this tone, or this expression, or this voice. You have a lot of control over that. I'm just not sure off the top of my head what you would need to pass to the front-end website in order, because this is all in browser stuff. I'm not sure what you would need to pass to get that to work properly. And you can see a couple of those at CodePen example, and then another one. Those particular demos have been kind of inconsistent for me in terms of being able to get them to work the first time, even though theoretically the code is simple behind it, and on the bot integration that's actually in that commit, I had no problems getting it to consistently work. There's some weird thing there. And so Dialogflow with the context side of things they will by default set context for you if you're just bouncing around between intents on Dialogflow entirely. If you go over to your own API, you can set both the names and values of the return contexts manually with whatever you want, and as long as it can end up as either a JSON array. I think you may have to have it as a string once you get one level of keys deep, but you have full control over what context you hand back if it pings you with a webhook request. And those will override anything you set in the UI in terms of returning context or returning text. It'll always use your external fulfillment if you tell it use external fulfillment, which we'll show once we get to the point of actually writing PHP code rather than JavaScript. We'll give this a couple more minutes and then jump on to the next step, which is making the browser recognize your voice. And by the way, if you've gotten to a point where you've made it through a given step, feel free to see if your neighbor or such has gotten that far, and if they haven't, then let's see if we can all do as much of these exercises as possible before reverting back to the code that I wrote. There's not a whole lot that I wrote, so you should be able to understand why I did what I did, so that you can then take that exact same feature of the browser and use it later in your own project. So, side note: if you refresh your web page, then that will pull a new session ID with Dialogflow, and that will reset all your contacts if you need to get back to a clean slate. So what the user says gets passed as text up to Dialogflow. That gets matched with an intent and an utterance in that intent. So what you end up doing is, once you match to an intent, you also parse out any entities that were specified in that particular utterance. So what ends up being called or passed back to the action is the intent name, the action name, the utterance is there, but you don't ever use it. You use the entity values and the parameter values that are parsed out of that utterance. So by the time that you hit your API, you're dealing with something with a whole bunch of keys and values parsed out. Whether that's on the current request or whether that is on a context that was set prior. Sure. If you want to skip all the way ahead to the end of this slide, then check out the add. So for folks who have not been sufficiently distracted by having the entire slide deck on their local machine, here's the slide's URL again. There are, again, a lot of links in here, so you're really going to want to follow along that way. Does anybody still need me to have this slide up? Raise your hand. Okay. All right, so if you want to catch all the way up to the end of this slide, the easiest way to do that will be to check out the add-speech-synthesis branch, in which case if you refresh the bot page, then it'll have a new checkbox of whether you want to do speech output on the answer. I was adding some stuff, but that is mainly a case of make sure that Dialogflow works. Make sure that if you log into the console that you can get stuff to work in. If you can get stuff to work in the console and you can get stuff to work inside your web application, we'll come back to Dialogflow later on, and I actually have a zip file of the agent that I set up, not the one we're using, but one that actually has things properly set up for the PHP World schedule example that I'm giving later. So we can catch all the way up to that, and everybody can be on the consistent side of things. So look at so if a user says anything in this bunch of utterances here or something close to that, then that matches what the user says. Okay, this is the schedule intent. And that's all it does so far. Now, for this highlighted Wednesday here, that is an entity that is a date entity. That will be parsed out by Dialogflow as a date, your month day. And all of that parsing gets done kind of as the initial step of, okay, I see a sentence that matches with the intent. I see parameters, pull those out. And we have an action down here of schedule. It says, okay, I need to call the schedule action. We have this parameter of date. And we can either push that to an API or handle it locally within Dialogflow, which we are doing here. Right now, this response doesn't have any parameters in it, but available to that response are any parameters that are set up here, for example, date, as well as any parameters set on the context. So if we look here, so if I do that, then let's look at the JSON to see what exactly it's sending back to kind of itself in this case, but it would normally be sending it to an API endpoint on your side if you want. We have the original query is here. We have the action of schedule because it matched to the schedule intent. And then the schedule intent has specified, well, the intent matches or is handing off to the schedule action. You can have multiple intents attached to an action. And then in this case, we have this parameters here, which when I said Wednesday, it parsed that out. Oh, you mean Wednesday, well, closest Wednesday is the 15th. All right, so it parses that Wednesday out, puts it into a common format, your month day. And because I told it to set a context and it's doing that context setting within Dialogflow, it also handed me back that parameter and the original value of that parameter. So this entire webhook or this entire JSON blob here is available to you if you tell Dialogflow to call your webhook in the fulfillment process. But all of the matching happens on Dialogflow servers, that is to say, on Google servers. Did that answer your question? Yes. So if we go to default welcome intent, so you have greetings here as an utterance, and then down here as text response, you have one of these options down here. Do you have both of those pieces? That's because you have a required, so any parameter that you have required that is not included in utterance, it will prompt you for. And until you give that parameter, until all of the required parameters either came in on the initial utterance or have been slot filled, as the term is, it will not jump to actually responding to your request. Number 1 and 2 and 3 are all, those are potential responses that it could give back at round robins them. So 1, 2, and 3. If you want to have more complex logic, you call your own API and do it there. So skipping ahead a little bit here, if we go to the fulfillment lightning bolt here, turn on webhook fulfillment. One quick note here, it's obvious that this is a Google product because it integrates with Firebase, which is a Google product. Cloud Functions, kind of like Amazon Lambda, except with a better logo. Because it's not an AWS product, the API is probably better. But you can throw JavaScript code in here, and I think Firebase Cloud Functions only supports JS. Maybe it supports 1 or 2 other languages. And at that point, you can run custom code, not have to deal with servers, and fulfill your requests that way with the JSON payload that was passed in. But this is a PHP conference last I checked, so we're not going to do that. Dialogflow is a subsidiary of Google. It's effectively a Google product at this point, similar to Gmail or the Google Cloud stuff or Firebase. So that's why it asks you to create a Google account to log into anything. They used to be able to log in via a whole bunch of other stuff, but after being acquired by Google, they're like, and you're signing with a Google account now. So with this fulfillment side of things, you can tell Dialogflow, hey, on intents where I specify, send out to a webhook, send this out to a webhook. You cannot specify more than one webhook for an entire agent. So if you need to route to other APIs, your webhook handles that. But that also makes things really simple of figuring out, okay, is on my webhook side? Well, I have this one controller. You don't try to do crazy routing stuff in Dialogflow on that side. You do your crazy routing stuff on utterances and intents, etc. It'll pass you the intent name and parse that out. But it's always calling one webhook. So in this case, you can go and you can set basic auth, you can set headers, so you can do some authentication that way with API keys or whatever. And okay, that's enabled now. Save that. And if we go back to intents, go back to schedule, we have this new fulfillment thing down here that says, okay, how do you want to use a webhook for fulfilling this particular request? If I check that box, then the only time that this kind of client-side, Dialogflow side response will show up is if my webhook is unresponsive. Otherwise, it will call the webhook, and as long as the webhook responds within 5 seconds, then it will take the webhook's response and then pass that on back down to the original client code that called the agent. So I'm going to check that webhook for now, and then since I'm jumping around a little bit here, we will come back to that. But first, let's get the client side of things all the way up to where we don't have to play with that anymore. So the third step on the client side is adding voice recognition. Now, this is an API that's visible in JavaScript, which is cool. If you've ever used Duolingo, the web version of Duolingo uses this speech recognition JavaScript API under the hood. Now, if you look here, it says, okay, it's an experimental API, and you look at the API support, you'll notice something interesting here. It's basically only available in Chrome. It kind of, sort of, maybe, sort of, not really is available in portable Firefox or mobile Firefox. Mozilla is working on getting, I believe it's like a fork of DeepSpeech or something like that. They're about at the point where they have machine learning good enough to either, I think they're doing the speech recognition client side, but as of right now, the only browser that has this voice recognition API available is Chrome. And the Chrome voice recognition API, all it really does is provide a really nice interface for calling Google Cloud Speech's API, which means that you need to have a Google Cloud Speech API key, except if you're running actual Google Chrome, not Chromium, not Vivaldi, not Brave Browser, just Chrome, because it has an API key for Google Cloud Speech built in. Now, the speech recognition API within JavaScript isn't too bad, but there's this project called Anyang that makes things even easier. So what we'll do for this project is pull in Anyang, tell it, route absolutely everything that you might hear. Normally you would do some client-side routing of, okay, the person said close the window, so I'm going to close the window. Person said scroll down, so I'm going to scroll down. Instead, we're going to route everything to a single callback and make that callback call Dialogflow. Also, if you're not merely jumping ahead to the code where I already have this implemented, unless you tell it not to, Anyang will keep listening for voice input. It will not stop unless you say, no, stop listening, and then make me click a button to restart listening. You will see a pop-up when you first load or first start requesting voice input, asking for permission to use the microphone. That's on the browser side. So I'll give you a few minutes to take a look at the APIs available here. You can try your hand at implementing them, or you can switch over to the Add Voice Recognition branch of the repo on GitHub. I'll give you probably another few minutes on that. Are you playing with ngrok?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. So I've got ngrok running.
So do you have both ngrok and your?
Yeah, so it's running, and I'm seeing the traffic that came in. But so my assumption was that I should be hitting port 80 on that, correct?
So
This URL.
did you
No,
forward?
I should actually, sorry, I can't specify.
So did you do ngrok HTTP 9000? Or
I did. So I actually did a 8085 because that's what I had ported.
okay,
That over.
yeah, you're correct there.
Yeah.
And then at that point,
HTTPS. Do I need to do that? No, it sets up
no,
both.
it'll set up both.
Okay. So that's where I've got this now,
Mhm.
right? And I should be able to go to that URL.
Do you have your PHP-S thing running still?
Yes, I've actually got Rock.
Okay, cool.
And I'm totally accessible to this,
Mhm.
which is working fine. But it's,
Yeah, if you go back to ngrok there.
no, it didn't. But
will that wait?
ngrok will make, if you, copy paste that to wherever. So to get to that point, which you're slightly ahead of me at this point, but to get to that point, once you've installed ngrok, and once you're running ngrok, it'll give you a host name. It's semi-randomish, and then you'll go into the fulfillment tab on Dialogflow. What is the issue?
No, I was pointing to
The webhook that's showing up before. You're pointing at 9,000.
yeah.
Okay.
The problem was I had set it up on the that's it. So I had set up the port that was in port
Yeah.
9,000 on my computer is pointing
Yes.
to the Docker's 8085, and I was trying to go
Yes.
straight to 8085.
There you go.
The port 9,000. So now that'll work. Now.
Yay, Docker port mapping. But yeah, if you go to the fulfillment tab on Dialogflow, then you can enable webhook fulfillment. Then you'll see a place that you can put your webhook endpoint.
The logic, and then we can have
Well,
we can have local logic
you-
impact
Yeah.
the response.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and what you'll do there is, once we get to that point on the in the repo, then there will be a route/hook that you'll use.
Okay.
And that is already wired up with stuff to do. So if you either get this far or you, again, check out the branch where we have this already done. Let's see here, get branch. Then do that. Refresh this. So if you switch branches, you'll see this new listen button here, which calls Anyang, sets things up. What's next on the PHP World schedule? So, see, it's close enough that that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, where the machine learning sort of things will catch it. You shouldn't rely on it, but it is there. Probably. So, yeah. Unfortunately, well, so it is a JavaScript API, and that JavaScript API is only available in Chrome because Apple has not yet decided that they're going to make the speech recognition that they use for Siri available to the Safari browser. And since, well, so Chrome on iOS isn't actually Chrome, it's a Safari WebView or WebKit WebView that uses Safari under the hood, because Apple is, Really, no matter what you use on iOS, you are using WebKit under the hood. Safari flavored WebKit. By contrast, this is not an iPhone 10. I'll rant about that after the presentation. The nice thing about doing like web testing and stuff when you have an Android device is Chrome is close enough to WebKit that you can kind of sort of do Safari testing, and you can use Firefox, and you can use Edge. But at this point, I will get off of the Android fan wagon because that's not what you came here for, and jump on to the next step, which is highlighted in PHP colors because we're going to use PHP, which is actually doing backend functionality, which, well, this is a PHP conference, so, and that's my primary language. So the PHP in this is going to look a lot better than the crazy janky JavaScript. So at this point, you'll compose or require Dialogflow Bridge. It was called API AI Bridge. I abandoned the package because I renamed everything to Dialogflow so it'd be less confusing. And actually tagged a release so you don't have to mess with minimum stability requirements yet. You'll have to do that later. So you'll compose or require this. That will pull in some PSR stuff. And now, as y'all have seen, we're going to need ngrok because we're going to need to expose the webhook that we're writing code for out to the wide internet. And ngrok allows you to tunnel your local machine out to the internet on a specific port, if you're paying for it at a specific host name, and works extremely well, particularly for demos like this, and I'm actually using it on my machine here to expose the webhook. So if you have not already, download ngrok, set up a free account. Free account is all you need. And then start it up and point it at the web server that you already have running locally. Whether that's Apache or Nginx inside Docker or the PHP built-in web server, doesn't matter. And as an added bonus, ngrok will terminate SSL for you. Yay, nobody paid for the ngrok plan and took my domain name. So yeah, once you get ngrok up and running, you'll see a display something like this. And you can, as noted there, drop in on port 4040 on your local host. And it will allow you to view every single request that has come across and replay requests if you need to, which is going to be handy if you have something buggy or doing 500s, et cetera, in your API or Dialogflow side of things. Because while it's not that difficult to re-request something in Dialogflow, it is annoying enough that hitting a replay button is a lot easier. So the Dialogflow webhook format is a little bit annoying, so I built a library around that to where, given a PSR7 web request, which we're dealing with because we're dealing with Slim 3, same thing with an Expressive or something like that, it'll parse that out into what I call a question, and then you can go from there, pull out parameters, pull out contexts, and then hand back an answer, which includes text components, context, voice component, and additional metadata if you want to add that. And at that point, all you have to do is implement callables that route actions, the actions shown in Dialogflow, to callables that take a question object and return an answer, and then you're good to go. And this is where hopefully I was good enough at writing the README for the Dialogflow bridge library that you can follow along there. So I'll give y'all a few minutes to either switch branches to where all this is already set up, or load in the library and build out this endpoint on your own. If you want to follow along with the code that is already built, you will want to add a route in Slim that points to, that you'll do a post to /hook. Yep. So what you'll do on a per intent level is, once you enable webhook-based fulfillment, you'll go into the intent. You will scroll to the bottom of the intent. You will expand the fulfillment subitem and click the box for fulfilling by a webhook. In this particular case, and I actually haven't run into a case where I've needed this, you will not need to check the box for enabling slot filling by a webhook. You can do that to get some additional control, but realistically, you can farm that out to Dialogflow without any issue. So if you want to either see the initial integration, I have that set up as a single commit, and then adding a handler in there as well, saying, okay, well, this is, I'm not sure what's happening yet, but here's some boilerplate to tell you that I'm actually hitting the back end rather than just handling everything within Dialogflow. So by the next slide, we'll be out of Dialogflow land more or less and into PHP code, where at least I'm a little bit more comfortable. Yeah. Yep. And there's the way that I have that constructor set up for the Dialogflow handler is, or the Dialogflow middleware, is that you specify a mapping of actions to callables, and then you can also specify a fallback callable if no action matches. And this is something where I do basically all of my development in PHP Storm, so this library is very much optimized for being able to autocomplete yourself all the way to a functioning product. So when in doubt, look at the type signature of the callable, of the callback, and look at the class definition for that, or try to tab complete stuff. Yep. No, it's okay. So the fulfillment side of things, the request goes like so. Client side calls Dialogflow. Dialogflow, yeah, passes response. Yep.
That was being like shown on the front end from something running in the back end.
Nope.
Going all the way got it.
Yeah.
So there's two places that it's going. There's a separate webhook that
It is front end calling Dialogflow. Dialogflow, if you turn the fulfillment option on, calling the webhook, webhook does a response that passes back through Dialogflow on the way back to the end user.
So that way I could add logic that if this happens, I can return a different response.
You can return a different response. You can set different contexts. You have full control over the response. And so realistically, what you would want to do there is, rather than pushing funny or laugh all the way to the server, you set up a joke intent. You set up an entity for tell me a joke about Laravel. At which point you go off on something about Rails. So that tell me a joke about whatever would be a joke type entity. And then you would set a callable on your server side, say, okay, I have this joke action. Respond to that action. Okay, I have an action here. I have a question here. Pull the joke type parameter, whether that's required or not. And then have your logic based on that. You can pull the context, you can pull the intent name, although you really don't need that. I think you can pull the action, you can pull parameters. Yep. So this library is not in use on the crazy project that I mentioned earlier, but I tried to make sure that everything that I needed for that large project, which is, again, dozens of intents, dozens of, there's probably a few hundred utterances that are mapped in that project, and it's a fairly sizable project. I try to make sure that everything I needed for that project is available in that library in terms of request and response. But if you look underneath it, you'll see that it's just JSON decoding the request and marshaling that into an object, and then on the other side, it's JSON encoding a response in JSON, and handing that back. So it's just a convenience adapter. You can play with the webhook in JSON directly if you see something there that you need that the interface isn't providing, or you can say, okay, well, this is missing. This is easy enough to add, and you can pull request it. Yeah, so there is, if you look back on your intent, you'll see that there is a number beside the output context. That is the number of requests for which that context is live. The way that if you need a context to refresh, then you make sure that that context gets reset on each callback to an intent, and you can set context, both the values and the lifetime on a context within the Dialogflow bridge. No. That what you would need to do is you would set, you would generate your session IDs such that, because the session ID is actually, I believe, included in the question. It is definitely included in the question. Whether or not it is visible in the library, I'm not sure. It'd be easy enough to add. But you take that session ID, and because you're generating that session ID client side, and you have full control over what that session ID is, you would key additional user data by that session ID that is permanent. That would be stored on your server. Yep, and if the session ID changes later on, what you would want to do there is potentially have the user logged in as them on your site, and then instantiate the Dialogflow.js client while they're logged in, build the session ID, know what that session ID is, push that session ID back up to the server saying, hey, the user is logged in, here's their session ID, at which point the server can pick that back up from Dialogflow. Well, Dialogflow is not going to pass back cookies.
Well, I'm saying if you know the user, I guess you have to tell Dialogflow again and generate your sessions ID dynamically. Like if I know the same person comes back,
yep. Yep.
I can create a session, remember their name, pass it into it, and then go from there.
Yeah, you can, as I recall, you can set context data, but at that point, the better way of handling that is you set the session ID to something that you know, and or say have the session ID be user ID whatever dash some random string, and then map that, and that's your identifier. So Dialogflow's context system, while powerful, is limited in length because it's a free service. They don't want you to have just tons of data on their side. Now, I haven't played with this much, but I believe that they may have some integration around Google Assistant, where Google Assistant will provide you with additional additional request metadata in terms of who's logged in and that sort of thing. So that may help with that. But I only just started playing with the Google Assistant integration that I'll show at the very end of this talk. So I am not as well versed on what that buys you. So once you've set up the webhook, we're going to download another library. This time it's a really quick joined-in client, quick, dirty, not optimized, but I needed something to parse out the PHP world schedule. Now at this point, if you do not have a schedule intent on your local Dialogflow, then you may want to detour for a second, switch to master. Well, you don't even really need to switch to master. I'll post in Slack a link to the zip file with a completed, not exactly what I was showing earlier, but a completed Dialogflow agent that you can pull in, restore from, in which case it will delete your existing agent work, so you may want to create a new agent and then work off of that. And that agent will have a schedule intent, at which point you have the Dialogflow piece for asking what the next event on the schedule is. So let me pull that. So we'll give this one about 5 minutes, and I realize I'm rushing a little bit at this point, but I do want to get to the very last piece, which is actually using the thing that I have in front of me here, which is the Google Assistant integration, but that can definitely be saved for the last 30 seconds of this. It has some setup to it, but we'll skip the setup for the sake of time. So yeah, the next piece of this is just getting the API to do something really useful. I have all the changes needed for that in that single commit. At this point, you will need to set your minimum stability to dev because I did not tag a release of the joined-in client. Yes, okay, so what you would do there is you go to your agent settings and click on export and import, and then go from there, which I think I'm going to do right now. Let me make sure that that's actually the correct file. Just going to download it. So once you import that, you'll get a schedule intent and a follow-up intent for that, and a fallback intent. Does mean you will lose the work that you've done so far unless you create a brand new agent and restore from that. Your call. Yep. Otherwise, you'll be using mine. So you'll notice that the diff on this is replacing a whole lot of kind of faked up code and adding a handler class, setting minimum stability stuff, and there's your handler class right there. What's the commit hash for that? So if you either cherry pick in that commit or whichever way you would like to set up the handler, you should end up with something like this. Interestingly enough, the keynote was not on the joined in schedule, except somehow lunch is. So I was thrown for a loop this morning. He's like, okay, was I assuming something in my code that it was broken? No, the keynote just wasn't there. But it's encouraging that the my dinky little joined in client library that does everything wrong is actually getting the right event here. So we'll give this a couple more minutes and then jump onto the context side of things. So this is pulling from joined-in's API. Yeah, a while back confirmed with Eli and Heather, hey, where should I be pulling talks from API-wise for this? Should I be scraping the site, which I had to do with Pacific Northwest PHP, or should I be doing something else? And they said, just go to joined-in. Yeah, joined-in's API, so they even do content type negotiations, so it looks nice in the browser. if you do an accept header of application JSON, then it looks nice in if you pipe it through JQ or whatever. Which, by the way, if you don't know about JQ, which is a JSON query thing, it's a pretty useful utility. No, it's just a command line utility. Yeah, it is, think, I mean, by default, it's like a JSON pretty print plus colors, but you can query back into the structure of the JSON or what have you. More or less. So at this point, we'll go down to the last bit of code here. And so in addition to what we may not just want to display one event, particularly at a multi-track conference like this. We'll say, okay, well, what else is happening? So that's where the power of context comes in, and you don't need a database locally to handle this kind of ephemeral state information. So you can say, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? Tell me the next thing. Tell me the next thing. And that's enough to say, oh, well, map to the intent with that context, set some variables on the context, keep track of where we are. And the logic was a little bit more complex on this one because I had to keep track of, okay, which track are we on, or we're going left to right here, and then jumping down to the next one and handling date stuff. So this one is probably one that you just want to, for the sake of time, switch over to the master branch where I have this work done. But what you end up with there is, you replay this, you'll note that it's now asking me whether I'd like to see another event, which, sure. Oh, hey, look, there was my talk in there as well. Yeah, I'm doing another talk. So what we're doing under the hood here is using context to pass a few additional variables, which if we go over to my PHP storm tag, first we're seeing if a date was set directly, in which case that overrides anything in the context because the context may last a little bit longer than we expect. But otherwise, we say, okay, well, we're either at the current time or we're not. Context data is set. Go ahead and fill in variables based on that. And one key thing here is if there are additional events, then we'll go ahead and set a context to keep track of where we were. Again, for the sake of time, I'll let you all take a look at that commit and that code later, because I'd like to get to the last step here, which is once we add the context piece, we have a built bot. But we can also integrate with Google Assistant. Basically, what you end up doing here is you go to integrations, you turn on Google Assistant, then it'll pop up and tell you, okay, we want to do, okay, default welcome intent is fine. And we can require sign-in there. Tell it that the schedule is allowed as an entry point into the application, which is one thing where Google Assistant is a little bit cleaner on this than Echo and Alexa is, where you can enter relatively deeply into your application right from not even basically being at the default state of Google Assistant. So we do update draft here. It'll push us over into Google where we would set up an application. So instead of that, I'm going to jump over here to an app that's already set up, and in this case, I'm having errors because I had turned my ngrok tunnel off. So we can go over to the simulator and throw information at Google Assistant. But realistically, let's use this instead. Hey Google, talk to PHP World 2017 schedule.
Okay, getting the test version of PHP World 2017 schedule.
Greetings.
What's on the schedule for today?
The next event is lunch on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Would you like me to give you another event?
Sure.
The next event is say yes to premature optimizations on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Would you like me to give you another event?
Nope.
Okay, just ask if you need more schedule information later.
Cancel. So I had to use the cancel word there because
The mic's off.
at that point, I was already inside my application on Google Assistant, and I haven't yet figured out the way to tell Google Assistant to bail out. But that works not only on the Google Home Mini that I have there, but also on Google Assistant on my phone. Because at this point, now it's tied to my account, it's a test app, but it was actually pretty easy, maybe 5-10 minutes worth of effort to go from a bot that normally we were accessing via a web browser to being accessible via Google Assistant on both here and here. Unfortunately, not on my Chromebook because they're reserving that for Google Pixel Book users right now, and I'm bitter. But other than that, it was a process that, compared with playing around with the Alexa side of things, was pretty streamlined. With that, we are basically at time. I will stick around here for another probably 10 minutes to field any questions that you may have. Again, all the code that we have, even if you were not able to keep up, is in the repo. I will be around for the rest of the conference, except when I'm giving my talk. If you have additional questions, I have done an implementation client side, et cetera, of this. Actually was Python on an actual Raspberry Pi-esque device. So there's some interesting stuff on building the flows and building the API endpoints that I didn't get into during this talk. But it's really fun to see when you're thinking, okay, well, I don't understand why Google Home or whatever couldn't parse what I said and actually do something useful with it. You can now solve that problem on your own. And that's pretty powerful. With that, thank you to everybody who attended. And that's a whole bunch of links of various information. Shameless sort of self-promotion here. I'm helping run a conference. I'm from Austin, helping run a conference in Austin in April. Call for papers is open, et cetera. So with that, thank everybody for coming and following along. You can. I have not played with that. But the thing with Alexa is that they have the front end and the natural language understanding piece kind of rolled into one, and then so it's a little bit less configurable, a little bit more finicky than this integration is. One. And then one other thing, if you're trying to test some of that stuff, probably the easiest way to do testing with the Alexa Skills Kit is either download the Amazon app on your phone, or there's an app called Reverb, which is just a couple meg way to interact with Alexa, and that works pretty well. It doesn't have like the fancy cards and that sort of thing that that like an Echo Show or something like that would have, but for the voice interface, Reverb is all you need.